So I just want to take a moment and thank everyone for joining us today. My name is Christine Pringle. I am a licensed mental health counselor, and I'm also a master certified addictions professional. And today I thought something that would be really important and beneficial to share is in reference to suicide prevention and awareness. First and foremost, we are going to be talking about suicide, and it may trigger someone who has been affected or has been close to someone to a suicide. So I just urge good self-care. And I just ask that you be open to the info. This is something that is utilized to raise awareness about suicide and provide information on what steps to take if you should suspect anyone of a possible who's possibly suicidal, because suicide is often preventable when intervention is available. And some of the information and skills you learned today are definitely appropriate to use with anyone, and potentially even for yourself. What is suicide? Suicide is not about wanting to die, but rather about not wanting to live. Suicide is about escaping unbearable pain. And suicide is a means to try and end a situation in which a person feels trapped. Because suicide is such a stigmatized topic, people often do not talk about it. And because of that, there's a lot of misperceptions and myths that can easily grow. So it's not a big problem. Suicide is not all that common. What we do know is that talking openly about suicide is a responsible manner that can have the opposite effect on those who are struggling. Someone sees their struggles and is willing to help them get the support they need. Only certain people are at risk for suicide. It would not be anyone I know. In fact, most often, a person that's considering suicide really doesn't want to die. They just, in fact, want to end the unbearable pain they're experiencing. They're often looking for someone to help them with their distress, and up to 90% of people speak to at least one person about their distress before making a suicide attempt. It allows us to get help. It's just too risky to talk to someone about suicide if they're not already thinking about it. You might want to give them the idea about it. And this is false. Before someone dies by suicide, they do talk about it with someone, usually a trusted person in their life. Talk of suicide should be taken seriously every time. If they are considering suicide, there's nothing I can do about it. We call these warning signs, and over 80% of the time they are in place when someone chooses suicide. The difficulty is in recognizing those warning signs for what they are. Warning signs offer a reason to ask if someone is okay. It is often considered taboo to talk about suicide or to admit to having suicidal thoughts, but open discussion and awareness is needed to protect those at risk of suicide. It is time to erase the stigma. Being aware of the facts about suicide makes you a vital partner in the suicide prevention that occurs in our community. My main goal is to encourage and support people to become comfortable on talking about suicide. It's been a taboo subject in families, public conversation, and the culture. In order to make change to suicide as a public health problem, we need to be able to talk openly about suicide and to be able to ask someone if they are considering ending their life. There are simple and direct phrases that can be used when talking about suicide. You can refer to it as a suicide, someone died by or died of suicide when speaking about a death. You can ask a person you are worried about if they have thought about suicide or if they've thought about ending their life. Phrases that should be avoided are things such as failed attempt or successful suicide, as they present the wrong message, equating living as a failure or dying as a success. These are preferred wording. However, it is most important to feel comfortable talking about suicide. Goal is to encourage and support talking about suicide. However, there are terms to be aware of and to avoid. $47,173 Americans died by suicide in 2017, about one person every 11 minutes. Suicide deaths are 2.4 times the number of homicides. Homicides were 19,510. There are actually 25 attempts for every completion in our nation. There's no strong correlation between mental illness and suicide. And it's actually the 10th leading cause of death across a lifespan and the second leading cause of death for 10 to 34-year-olds. Males account for about 78 to 80% of suicide deaths. Twice the number of reported suicides are misclassified as accidents or just unreported. Approximately 6,000 veterans die by suicide each year, accounting for 14% of all the suicides annually. Since 2009, suicide has exceeded motor vehicle crash-related deaths. 5 million living Americans have attempted to kill themselves. Each suicide intimately affects at least 6 other people. Suicide in Florida is the 9th leading cause of death among all ages, 3rd leading cause of death for 15 to 34-year-olds, 4th leading cause of death in ages 35 to 54, and suicide deaths exceed homicide deaths by 10.5 times. 8.6 people die every day by suicide in Florida, 4.1 male attempts per every female attempt, 3,152 suicide deaths per year on average. Although suicide rates peak in late life, risk of attempted suicide peaks among the young. The ratio of attempted suicide to deaths by suicide for adolescents and young adults is, by conservative estimates, about 100 to 1, although estimates of up to 300 to 1 exist in the literature. For youth, a suicide can be viewed as a very significant cry for help. If the response to suicidal behavior includes supports that reduce stress, address treatment and support needs, very few return to suicidal behavior. Youth tend to be more impulsive and act swiftly when in distress. The ratio of attempted suicide to deaths by suicide for the elderly is often given as 4 to 1. This is based on the idea that when suicidal elders are more planful, more secretive, and choose more highly lethal means. What are some of the warning signs, risk factors, and protective factors? Warning signs are stressful events or situations that may increase the likelihood of a suicide attempt or death. Personal and social resources that promote resiliency and reduce the potential of suicide and other high-risk behaviors. And protective factors. The early observable signs indicate increased risk of suicide for someone in the near term, within hours or days. Risk factors may not be known, but the warning signs are observable and require attention. We often focus on warning signs because they represent significant changes in the appearance or behavior of an individual. They are sometimes the invitation to intervene with a suicidal individual. All warning signs are serious and seek help where it is needed. Risk factors for suicide are common. We all have them, and they represent a statistical risk, but are not predictive. The more risk factors a person has, the greater their vulnerability. Some risk factors are family, personal, behavioral, social, environmental. There's some long terms that are unchanging. Family history of suicide, mental illness, substance use, race, gender. Some can be modifiable. Abuse, unrealistic parental expectations, extreme perfectionism, and some triggers, major family conflict, rejection, relationship breakup, bullying, harassment, arrest. And men as a high risk group. It's about 78% to about 80% of all US suicides. Gender disparity highest in elders, especially in white individuals. Gender issues include poor help seeking, men less likely to talk to someone when in crisis, difficulty recognizing and expressing emotions, increased substance abuse, use more lethal means for attempts, feeling like a burden, struggle between belongingness and independence. Women and suicide. Though overall, women have significantly lower suicide completion rates, they attempt suicide at 3 times the rate of men. Suicide rates among women have been increasing at a faster rate than those of men for over the past 10 years. They report significantly higher rates of depression, pregnancy, whether it was unwanted, difficult, postpartum, abortion, miscarriage, and parenthood. Child with mental health concerns, loss of a child. The protective factors for women are increased verbal and social skills, increased help-seeking behaviors, social networks, stronger connections to services, and they tend to maintain a higher reported sense of relevance as they age. And suicide risk in military veterans. It's about 20% of US suicides are veterans, and that rate just continues to be on the rise. Although rates of suicide have declined among older veterans, they have increased among veterans under the age of 30. An effort is definitely underway to increase outreach and normalize help-seeking behavior. Some of the factors that increase the risk of military veterans are their age, the younger and older, the severity of the wounds, the hospitalization, frequent and extended deployments, physical, sexual assault while in the military, and active substance abuse. The risk is then heightened even greater by PTSD, traumatic brain injury, and depression. There can also be some pre-existing conditions as well. Female veterans 18 to 34 die by suicide 6 times the non-veteran rate. Some protective factors across the lifespan. Protective factors are defined as any positive connection or quality, anything that is life-affirming. So, for example, pets, spirituality, religious beliefs. Protective factors help people get through difficult experiences and allow them to bounce back. Protective factors are the building blocks of resiliency. Protective factors come from within an individual as well as the supports available outside the individual, whether that be through family, community, your religious group. Protective factors are what keep risk factors from becoming overwhelming. They are the good things that can counterbalance some difficult risk factors. It is always important to explore the protective factors in a person's life, and equally important to remember that they can be built, fostered, and supported over time. Take a moment and think about what are some examples of protective factors in your own life? Are they important? Are they something that you look to every day? What are some of the warning signs? Although there are many warning signs, every situation is unique. The key to understand how an individual feels about their life and how they see their current situation. There are some warning signs that signal that immediate action is needed to preserve safety. Clear signs of a suicidal crisis. These are very serious warning signs, and time is of the essence. Do not leave the person alone and make sure that immediate action is taken. Use 911 if someone has a weapon, is out of control, refuses help, or is impaired due to substance use or psychosis. Call the crisis line. Other warning signs may not point directly at suicide risk, but do indicate that someone may be in crisis. They invite you to step up and ask that, what's going on with this person? You want to look at changes in one's behavior that may draw concern. Not drinking a 12-pack of beer a night over an extended period of time, but the person who suddenly starts drinking. Someone is potentially sleeping more or less, having changes in eating patterns, feeling overwhelmed, some changes in mood, especially increase in dramatic such behaviors, recklessness, risky behaviors, withdrawal from friends and family. Although rare, suicide can even occur in individuals that are ages 5 to 14. We do have to focus, though, on some of the signs for adolescents up to the age of 20. So they may talk about or make plans for suicide, express hopelessness, recent increased agitation or irritability, changes in sleep, anger, or hostility. Youth under 15, refusal to go to school, talk of intent to die, self-harm, some verbal clues and cues of suicidal thoughts. It's important to keep your eyes and ears open. Suicide is stigmatized, and it makes it difficult for people to talk about it openly, even if they are at serious risk. Their verbal cues might therefore be guarded, indirect, or in code. So when you hear words, we need to take them seriously every time. Remember, it is okay to ask about the meaning of the words, and it is okay to ask about suicidal intentions. If you're in doubt about their response, ask again. Direct clues can be terms like, I wish I was dead. I'm going to end it all. I'm going to kill myself. Some less direct clues are, life's just too hard. You'd be better off without me. And what's the point? From a suicidal person's point of view, whether it's 8 or 88 years old, generally speaking, for someone in a suicidal crisis, life is in crisis. This person has many difficult things going on all at once, and their ability to cope is overwhelmed. Problem solving becomes extremely difficult. Suicide becomes the one and only alternative, a possible solution, a way to end the pain, and sometimes seen as the only way out. The individual's thinking is affected. It becomes extreme, either or, very black and white, and finally tunnel thinking, in which the person sees no other way out of his or her circumstances. They're unable to see the needs or supports of others, but are consumed by the distress they feel. For this reason, suicide is often seen as a selfish act, but we indeed know that is untrue. It's vital to acknowledge that ambivalence usually exists. Suicidal people often debate whether they should live or die right up to the final moments of their life. Some even want to live after they've taken lethal action. The ambivalence gives helpers a chance to intervene, to engage the part of the person that wishes to live. Most are still looking for a way out other than suicide. Just to stress one more time, the invitations to intervene in suicidal behavior come in very different forms. It is almost as if the person who might be feeling suicidal floats on a trial balloon to see if anyone will notice. It really is up to us to notice. Remember, if the thought of suicide for someone else enters your mind, your heart, your gut, chances are 99% of the time that these thoughts have entered the other person's mind as well. Not only is it okay to ask them about it, you have been invited to ask. You can't lose if they deny it. They at least know that you have noticed them, care about them, and are open to talking about suicide. You will have to decide what further steps to take if you are concerned. What are some of the quote unquote clues that someone's reaching out, that someone's invited you to ask? Some feelings that have been commonly shared are desperation, guilt, worthlessness, loneliness, hopelessness. Some of the actions are giving away possessions, withdrawal, increased impulsivity, lack of interest. And some thoughts are, all of my problems will end soon. I just can't take it anymore. I wish I were dead. You'd be better off without me, and I just can't do anything right. So why is it that people hesitate to ask for help? Along with previously discussed stigmas that occur in our society, people hesitate to ask for many reasons. Unwilling to admit needed help, afraid to upset or anger others, unsure of available help or resources, shame, fear of stigma, worry about doing or saying the right thing, afraid to put the idea in someone's head, and feeling like it's not their issue. If you are uncomfortable about intervening directly at any time, at least know the gatekeepers in your agency who are responsible for taking action, and let them know what you have observed and why you aren't concerned. And what I mean by agency is whether that be your affiliation in your community, your household, your local religious center, your local community center, whatever connection you have, know that there's no right way, there is no wrong way, but there are people out there that are able to help. The reason to learn about suicide and the risk factors is to better recognize and prepare for intervening with an individual in a suicidal crisis. It is the goal of this presentation that you or someone you know will be able to better recognize that someone is in need of help and will connect them to the help they need. So what are some things that are helpful? Show you care. Listen carefully. Really genuinely listen. It shows you care. Remember, if anything at all causes you to think that this person might be thinking about suicide, please understand that chances are great, but they've already thought about it. It's perfectly okay to ask. I'm concerned about you. How do you feel? Ask the question. Asking about suicide is a good thing. It brings it into the open, provides relief and hope. It is the only way to know if someone is suicidal. Ask. Where, when, how? After listening, avoid getting into a power struggle over the why. Just let it go. Ask about suicide in a direct, non-judgmental way. Be prepared to deal with the answer. The words you use are not as important as the fact that you ask. Remain calm and generally show that you care and are willing to listen. Are you thinking about suicide? Get help. Try to get the person involved in identifying resources. If that doesn't work, you call for help or ask someone else to do it while you stay with the suicidal person. Remember, someone in crisis may not realize that help is even possible. It's that tunnel vision. There's no other way out. So guide them to it. You're not alone. Let me help you. Listen. Be open and patient. Listen for the meaning behind the words. Support their being open about suicide. Don't judge, don't minimize their plan, and offer empathy rather than a try to quote unquote fix the problem. Ask the questions. Ask clearly and directly, are you thinking of suicide? Discuss the risk of suicide. Disable any immediate plan. And offer support and compassion. Remember, don't try to do it all alone. Never keep it a secret, and explore resources together. We're a community. We stand by each other and we help each other. So what are some of the resources for help? If you are concerned about anyone being suicidal in your community, your household, your support group, please contact someone as soon as possible. Resources are provided at all different levels of care. In a situation where a person may need mental health care and not in crisis, some physicians, mental health clinicians, and religious leaders are good referrals as well. Who else? So in a time of crisis, please reach out, dial 911 or law enforcement. There is a national suicide line. Some local crisis agencies are Central Florida crisis hotlines and a 24-hour mental health assistance. Hospital emergency room staff, PCP offices in rural health centers in rural areas. For follow-up support and information after the crisis, you can reach out to a private counselor or therapist. I'm Alive chat and Lifeline chat. Faith Community, Local Health Center, 211, Halo, Yellow Ribbon, of course, NAMI, and the Bobby White Foundation. When to call crisis? Well, be aware of who and where and what. You can always know that crisis clinicians are available 24/7, and clinicians can often come to your location for an assessment. You can call for a phone consult when you are concerned about someone's mental health, need advice about how to help someone in distress, and worried about someone and need another opinion. Following a significant suicide attempt, and certainly following a death by suicide, a family is in crisis and their functioning is seriously compromised. Following a suicide or sudden death in your community, a significant number of people may be significantly affected. The crisis team often takes a lead in response and should be meeting directly in response to that. Some crisis units can be law enforcement, local community agencies, and local religious leaders as well. Initial focus is on safety. There'll be work to address reduction in the crisis, safety planning for managing at home and in the community, and kind of returning back to that community after a crisis is coordinating and supporting the family, support person overseeing the transition. What do other people need to know? Offering hope and support, and encourage follow through with treatment. Attend to the needs of other affected members of your community as well. Suicide ultimately has a ripple effect, and many others are directly affected by one suicide. Estimated 6 close to each suicide, but that's a very conservative number. So with that ratio being said, that implies to at least 208,000 survivors each year. Suicide almost always comes suddenly, unexpectedly, and often without any violence. The fact that it is premature end of natural lifespan, it is self-inflicted, adds to the emotional shock. and to the stigma surrounding the loss. The reaction is powerful and immediate and can vary widely from person to person, but often includes the noted feelings: shock, hurt, anger, loss and grief, questions, torment, guilt, and regret. Some key issues for survivors: it presents a complicated grief process in that the death was unexpected, unnatural, and untimely. The grief involves strongly conflicting emotions of sadness, guilt, anger, fear, and perhaps even relief. A survivor is left with unanswered questions and unfinished business. Healing from the grief of suicide takes much longer than healing from a death that comes at the natural end of a long life. The estimate's about 3 to 5 times longer. Until the police determine that a death was by suicide, it may be considered a homicide, and family members may be treated as suspects, which can add to the difficulty accepting the loss and grieving. If the first death that a young person experiences is by suicide, they may question their own vulnerability. Survivors often struggle to make meaning of the loss. They face a storm of questions, suffer from overwhelmingly complicated feelings, may take a long time to grieve, and there needs to be an understanding and support. And then youth survivors have special issues. So how can you be supportive after a suicide? Often people feel confused about how they can provide support to students, youth, colleagues, family members, and others touched by suicide or death. Be patient, kind, and non-judgmental. It's important to acknowledge the loss, use the name of the deceased, share your presence, acknowledge the good things, stay in touch over time, and recommend some grief support counseling or support groups for survivors in your area. And remember to take care of yourself. Self-care is important when dealing with crisis and suicidal events. You always have to make sure that you're supporting your own health and balanced lifestyle. This can also help others get through the crisis and maintain a balanced life. Acknowledge the intensity of your feelings. Seek support from those around you. Share your feelings with friends and family. Try to avoid over-involvement and know that you're not responsible for another person's choice to end their life. Remember, share the burden with others in order to best support someone who may be suicidal. Thank you. I will now leave this open for anyone who may have any questions.
Avery?
I did not have any specific questions, but I just wanted to thank you for the information.
Oh, you're very welcome, Avery. I really appreciate that. And know too, I can have Debbie share my email address or anything if you maybe come up with any questions later or want a list of the resources, whatever I can do to support or help you, let me know. Thank you, Avery.
Andy?
Hi, I just wanted to ask, I think in one of your early slides, you said that there was no correlation between mental illness and suicide. Is that right?
So they have not found a correlation where an individual's diagnosis has been something that was a determiner of suicide. And the reason they say that is because of the percentage of individuals that have diagnoses who don't have attempt or do not follow through. And so they have not been able to With the increase in rates, I'm hoping that there's more research done and there's an ability to find that correlation, but as of right now, they have not.
But it's not saying that people who attempt and commit suicide are not mentally ill, just that mentally ill is not necessarily a predictor of suicide.
Precisely. Yes, because you do, individuals have been found for those who struggle with bipolar, depression, PTSD. There are significant rates of those populations. So absolutely, you will find that an individual who's struggling with depression or struggling with bipolar may ultimately find that as a solution.
And is there any like talk or discussion amongst researchers about having suicidal depression be its own diagnosis?
No, not that I've heard.
Okay.
And as far as the community, there are, and that might be something important to share, that there are the risk of someone who struggles with bipolar in attempting suicide is actually greater than someone who has a diagnosis of depression.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me because there's so many levels of depression. It seems.
Absolutely. I'm sure there could be a DSM just based on the different levels of depression.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. As Avery said, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Mandy.
Anyone else have any questions for Christine? It looks like they don't. Christine, did you have anything you wanted to say before we end?
No, well, I guess I am if I'm going to follow up. If you do have any follow-up questions or need additional resources, my email is ckpringle@outlook.com. Feel free to email at any time. And I'd be more than happy to share some of the resources that are presented on the slides. And know that NAMI is always in the community and always ready to support at some of these crisis times of need.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Christine, for sharing with us.
Thank
today.
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Christine.